All right, let's just get right into it. Welcome to today's explainer, where we are tackling a seriously radical premise from a very ancient text. You know, we usually think of religious and ethical systems as these completely rigid sets of rules, right? Do this, don't do that, and whatever you do, never ever cross these lines. But what if strict adherence to the rules is actually the very thing getting in the way of true goodness? What if the absolute highest form of compassion sometimes demands that you bend, or even completely break the rules? Well, that is exactly the mind-bending moral puzzle we're unpacking today.
To figure this out, we're pulling directly from the Sūtra on the assertment of the Vinaya. It's this incredible digitized ancient Mahāyāna Buddhist text, famously translated by a Dunhuang Tripiṭaka master. What we're doing today is exploring the incredibly profound, honestly surprising arguments laid out in this exact text to see how it completely flips our normal understanding of ethics, discipline, and human connection right on its head.
So here's our roadmap for the explainer. We'll hit the great Bodhisattva vows, check out the 35 Buddhas' repentance, compare two completely different paths of discipline, figure out why anger is considered the ultimate deal breaker, and finally, wrap it all up with the ultimate empty Vinaya.
Starting right off with Section 1, the Great Bodhisattva Vows, where we'll see why intent matters way more than the rules.
The sutra opens with this incredibly dramatic scene. Picture this. The Buddha is surveying an assembly of thousands, and one by one, these highly realized beings, bodhisattvas, step forward to make these massive, universe-altering pledges. Take Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, who says, "I can endure to be a refuge for the stubborn and evil beings of the bad realms." This brilliantly captures the whole heartbeat of the Mahāyāna path. It is definitely not about retreating to some quiet, pristine mountain to keep your own hands clean. The intent here is fiercely, selflessly focused on diving headfirst into the messiest, darkest parts of the world to help the absolute most difficult, flawed beings out there.
And the Buddha himself actually backs this up, telling the assembly, "I can endure in the latter times to uphold the true Dharma and use various skillful means to mature as sentient beings." The really crucial detail here is that phrase, the latter times. He's talking about a degenerate age, basically an era where people are heavily burdened by their own flaws and confusion. So the text is setting up a massive central conflict. How on earth do you save people who are stubborn and totally tangled up in their worldly problems? Because let's be real, you can't just hand them a dusty rulebook. They simply aren't going to follow it. You need a completely different strategy.
And that strategy is defined right here. It's called skillful means, or upaya. This concept is literally the master key that unlocks the rest of the text. Skillful means is a bodhisattva's ability to perfectly adapt to whoever they're trying to help. If the people desperately need a powerful king to guide them, boom, the bodhisattva manifests as a king. If they just need an ordinary, everyday person to relate to, they appear as a layman. They intentionally break the conventional mold of what a holy person should look like so they can intimately connect with people exactly where they are. And the real magic is that they do all of this without their own internal compass wavering for a second.
Which brings us to Section 2, the 35 Buddhas' repentance, a surprisingly practical tool.
Because look, if you're diving into the messy, chaotic world to help people, things aren't always going to go perfectly. The text is actually incredibly realistic about this. It explicitly acknowledges that, even bodhisattvas make mistakes. In their efforts to help, or honestly just through sheer human fallibility, they might stumble. The sutra even lists some seriously grave errors, like the 5 unpardonable sins, or major offenses against sacred objects and monastic communities. But instead of saying, well, you broke the rule, you're permanently out, the text provides a highly practical mechanism for spiritual redemption. It completely understands that sitting around dwelling on your failures just paralyzes your ability to do any good for anyone else.
So how do they handle these screw-ups? It's totally systematic. The sutra outlines 3 really concrete steps for this repentance ritual. First, you confess sincerely. You actually visualize yourself standing before the 35 Buddhas. Second, you actively rejoice in all the good that exists in the world, shifting your mindset. And third, you take any merit or good karma you might have and dedicate it towards supreme enlightenment for everyone. It's this beautifully efficient psychological reset button. It essentially transforms crippling guilt into renewed focus, letting the practitioner dust themselves off and get right back to the vital work of compassion.
All right, let's move to Section 3, 2 very different paths of discipline.
Consider the Shravaka path, also known as the hearer path. Their entire concept of discipline is about strict, unyielding adherence to the rules. The sutra uses this amazing visceral metaphor. They want to escape the cycle of rebirth as urgently as someone trying to put out a fire on their own head. Because of that intense urgency, their rules are completely inflexible. Their only focus is personal liberation. But then, in stark contrast, you have the Bodhisattva. Their discipline is highly flexible. Instead of fleeing the cycle of rebirth, they willingly embrace countless future lifetimes just to stick around and help people. Their priority absolutely isn't personal purity. It's about accommodating and actively guiding others. And honestly, this brings up the most brilliant paradox of the entire text. Listen to this quote straight from the sutra. For a Shravaka, not having a single thought of desire for rebirth is pure discipline. For a Bodhisattva, this same mindset is the greatest broken precept. Just let that sink in for a second. The exact same behavior, wanting to escape the messy world forever, is the absolute highest virtue for one path and a total catastrophic failure for the other. A Bodhisattva is fundamentally required to stay engaged with the world. That takes us to section 4, why anger is worse. This is where we get into the text's moral calculus. So this text lays out a really fascinating way of weighing good and bad. Let's say a bodhisattva commits a fault out of desire, like attachment or affection. The sutra actually considers this a minor fault. Now why is that? Because desire, even when it's flawed, keeps you connected to other beings. It creates messy attachments, sure, and it's super hard to clear away, but at the end of the day, you haven't abandoned anyone. On the flip side, if a bodhisattva commits a fault out of anger, it is considered a massive, major fault that leads straight to spiritual ruin. Why? Because anger pushes people away. It literally severs the connection. For a bodhisattva whose entire existence relies on compassion, abandoning beings in a fit of rage is the ultimate violation of their purpose.
To drive this home, the sutra gives us this incredibly rich, striking metaphor for how a bodhisattva's grand mission interacts with those smaller, minor flaws. It says, like a lion's roar silencing insects, the bodhisattva's courageous mind and roots of goodness overpower lesser moral failings. It's just a great image. The sheer overwhelming force of their dedication and compassion completely drowns out any technical rule breaking. If they have to bend a rule out of genuine compassion to save someone, the annoying insect of that broken rule is completely silenced by the deafening lion's roar of their pure intent.
And finally, we arrive at section 5, the ultimate empty Vinaya, featuring Manjusri's wisdom. Okay, things get incredibly abstract, but really cool right here. The Bodhisattva Manjusri steps in, takes this already radical framework, and pushes it all the way into pure philosophy. He argues that all phenomena, literally everything around us, are inherently pure and completely without defilement to begin with. True discipline, he says, isn't about frantically scrubbing dirt off yourself. It's realizing there is no fixed self to be tainted in the first place. In fact, he argues that clinging rigidly to rules, believing that following them makes you somehow holy, is just a form of spiritual arrogance. Ultimate reality isn't a ledger of your good and bad deeds. It's completely expansive, totally ungraspable, and just like empty space. So, the absolute knockout punch Manjusri delivers is summarized perfectly right here. If you think, I am abandoning greed or anger, you are dwelling in arrogance. It is the ultimate ego trap. Think about it. The very second you pat yourself on the back for being so pure, the moment you start defining yourself by how perfectly you follow the rules compared to everyone else, you've completely missed the deeper truth. You've basically just built a brand new ego out of your own perceived holiness. True purity is acting with spontaneous, limitless compassion without ever keeping score. It's honestly wild to think that this level of sophisticated, deeply psychological deconstruction of ethics was being debated thousands of years ago. And the only reason we have access to these exact debates today is thanks to the incredible preservation efforts of the CBETA Comprehensive Buddhist Electronic Text Archive Foundation. They've done the hard work of bridging this ancient, mind-expanding philosophy with our modern digital world so we can still grapple with these ideas today.
And grapple with them, we absolutely should. This text leaves us with a massive challenge, and I want to leave you with one final question, directly inspired by the sutra's wisdom. If ultimate compassion sometimes requires breaking the rules, where in your own life might rigid structures, or maybe just a stubborn desire to be right, actually be holding back your capacity to truly connect with and help others? Take a moment to really think about that. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the rules.